Okay, so first I'm gonna true the neck. So I'll take my bodice pattern and I will line it up. And find something that looks good. And then I'll transfer that. Okay. Now for the armhole, what I'm gonna do is I am going to trace my basic block. There's my notch. And then, so I'll show you why I'm doing this. So if I just match my basic block up and I try and make it match my underarm, it's not going to match my shoulder. And if I try and make it match my shoulder, it's not going to match my own underarm. And that's because this got spread out, and so it's bending the armhole. So I could measure my armhole. So my armhole is get it right on everywhere. Nine and a quarter. So I could put my 9 and a quarter here and like bend it. 9 and a quarter. But I run the risk of, like, without being really exact, I run the risk of making this part too narrow and the armhole too far over on the bust. And I want the armhole the same measurement so that I don't have to modify my sleeve. So this, what I have right here, might work. I could draw this shape and then put it up on the dress form. But if the shape doesn't work, then I, just have to keep bending this curve and editing until I get 9 and a half or 9 and a quarter, because that's what my front armhole needs to be in order to fit the sleeve that I drafted. So I'm doing another version of that. Instead of using a bendy ruler to measure my armhole, I'm just using my actual armhole to measure my armhole. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this so that I can bend it so that it's similar to what happened when I draped the added fullness into this side bodice. So this outer edge doesn't really matter what shape it is. I have my high point shoulder, which is important, and my shoulder tip, which is important, and my underarm side seam, which is important, and then the shape of my armhole, which is important. And the rest of this out here doesn't really matter. What matters is I'll just make little marks in red. So right here, this is high point shoulder, HPS, that's important. Right here, this is shoulder tip. So this whole shoulder is important. And this is my armhole, which is important. This is my armhole notch, which is important. And right here is my, I'm going to call it my underarm. And that's important. So now I will go ahead and cut out my armhole. And I'm doing this because I just want to use the sleeve that I already drafted. I don't want to have to figure out a new armhole and a new sleeve. So now I look at this, right, and it needs to bend like this. So it looks like in this neighborhood, I should be able to stay pretty flat. So right here on my drape are my ease control notches. So it looks like if I go from my ease control notches to my armhole, it looks like that this area of my armhole should be able to stay pretty straight. And then if I put this up in my underarm against my side seam, okay, so it looks like right in this neighborhood is where my other set of ease control notches are. So probably if I come to about here, so probably I don't need to mess with this part of my armhole, and I don't need to mess with this part of my armhole. So maybe I can try and just do some bending in here. So let's see what that looks like. So I don't want it to be too much of an angle, but I guess I can true it. So let's see, what's this total distance right here? 1.25 inches. So what if I do every, I don't know, like 3/8 of an inch? Okay, so I'll do something like that. And what I'm gonna do is I don't need this much paper out here, so maybe I'll leave it. I was thinking about trimming some of it. So what's this distance out here? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if so I'm just like dividing this space. So maybe that's a cut line. And so that was to there. And maybe that's a cut line. And maybe that's a cut line. So I don't cut through my armhole. I'm going to leave everybody kind of hinged. So again, this is just a scrap of dot paper that was big enough to allow me to trace off my shoulder and a little bit of my side seam and my armhole. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to nail down my shoulder tip. And of course, there's my tacks. So my shoulder tip is right here. And my underarm side seam is right here. And I just want to get where my armhole is. I want that to be like nice and flat, but I'm keeping it the same length, 9 1/4, but I'm changing the curve a little bit. So now I can trace in black, trace my new strangely curved armhole. And then I'll come back in and true it. So I'm going to transfer that notch because that'll match the notch that I already have on my sleeve. Okay. Now I'll grab my rulers and curves and true this a little bit. So out of my shoulder seam, I'm straight for, I don't know, what is that? About 2 inches out of my shoulder seam. It's square, which is good news. And then out of my side seam, the bottom of my armhole is square for about 1 inch. And then the curve that I drew starts to lift off my ruler. So I just have to true the curve in between there. And let's see, what if how do we get this to work? I might have to shift my curve and blend. So this looks like one part. And then I'm going to have to shift and blend a couple times here. So this gets me about 1.5 inches into the curve, and then it doesn't match anymore. So, and then if I scoot this, it looks like I can get this right here. So this part here is just me tracing when I was draping, I traced the armhole plate, which really doesn't have a relationship to the, I mean, it's not a direct relationship to the armhole. It just gives me a guide mark to know that that's where the plate is, and I want to be a little bit away from that. So what I did was, again, I took my basic block armhole, I traced it off onto a scrap of dot paper. I kind of figured out, like, going from the ease control notch to the armhole, kind of figured out the space where the extreme bend has to happen. And I just divided that space up here and then divided that same space up here and slashed up to the armhole without going through it so that I could keep the armhole the same length. And then I pinned into points that I know of. So like my high point shoulder and my underarm. And then I just let this kind of spread out over here so that I could get the shape of my armhole. So now my armhole is a little bit different shape than my original basic block, as you can see, but it should still be 9 1/4. So I'm going to measure this new curve and make sure that I'm still getting 9 1/4. And I am. So great. This should work with my sleeve. So I transferred this notch here. This was my ease control notch. And then for fullness, or just a control notch. So this is a control notch. And then my other control notch that I made was on my princess seam. It doesn't have to be there. That's just where it was when I did this draft, or this drape, this version of this drape. So this is what I have so far. This is my center front neck. Here's my control notch that's going to help me match this piece to my front piece. So this should match from here to here, and it doesn't exactly, so I'm going to go ahead and say this is my notch here, and then down here, let's walk that to there. So this one looks like it's about here. And then I didn't make a notch for, I'm not seeing it. I didn't make a notch for the middle. So maybe I'll do that. So I'll take my front bodice and I'll fold it to get these red notches on top of each other. And I'll find the middle of this. And it's right about where I had my notch. So that's great. And then I'll do the same thing here. I'll line this control notch up with this control notch. I'll find the middle, and it'll give me one more spot to check that I'm distributing my fullness equally. So right here will be another control notch. So that way I'll have 3 reference points. So from here to here, we're going to make this match. And from here to here, we're going to make this match when we sew it together. Okay, so my front bodice is, or my side front bodice is trued. Now what I need is to figure out how much fabric I need, how much dot paper I need. So I'm going to measure across the spot on the straight grain that's the widest. So it's kind of from, let me use some rulers to give us some parameters here. So this is the widest part here in the center front, and then this is the widest part here on the side. So then I would measure across between these two. To figure out my widest part, right? So it looks like I need about 12 inches of paper on for the straight grain. And then for the cross grain, it looks like high point shoulder is one of my parameters. I'll use the outside of my ruler this time. So up here looks like a high point, and then a low point looks like it's down here. So if I measure between those two, I need a ruler. So I need a piece of dot paper that's probably about 16 inches in this direction. So I need dot paper that is, just write it down. So 16 inches in one direction, and not that it matters, but that's the cross grain that I'm measuring. And then to go back and figure out how much dot paper I need for the straight grain, we were figuring out how wide this is. So again, I'll use the outside of my ruler. So 16 across, and it looks like approximately 12 on the straight grain. So paper doesn't have, like the dots are supposed to give us those two directions, but it doesn't matter which is which. So we just need enough paper to get behind this, and we want the dots in line with the grid that we drew. So see you back here to true our pattern.